From the great state of New York, please help me welcome Andrew Yang.
Hello, Iowa! I just want to press some flash. Hello, everyone. How are we all doing? We're at Teddy Roosevelt High School, am I right? You're not going to believe this. I am Teddy Roosevelt's great-granddaughter's godfather, which makes me absolutely nothing to Teddy Roosevelt. Hello, I'm Andrew Yang. I'm running for president, and I'm not a career politician, as you might have gathered from something. I'm a problem solver and an entrepreneur, and I'm running for president to solve the biggest problem of our time, which is how the heck did Donald Trump become our president? And if you watch cable news, you get a sense that he became our president because of some combination of Russia or racism or Facebook or the FBI. But I believe the explanation's more direct and straightforward, which is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and 40,000 right here in Iowa. And what we did to those jobs, we will now do. How many of you all noticed stores closing where you live here in Iowa? And why are those stores closing? Amazon. Amazon's soaking up $20 billion in business. And how much did Amazon pay in taxes last year? Zero. That's right. So that's the math for Iowa. 20 billion out, zero back. And that is why Donald Trump won the state by 9 points. That's why when you walk into McDonald's, you see the self-serve kiosk, and you see that that's going to spread to every fast food chain over the next number of years. How many of you all know a truck driver? My friends in California are working on trucks that can drive themselves. Think about what that's going to mean for the people here in Iowa. So these are the real changes that got Donald Trump elected, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. We're in the midst of it, and Donald Trump is a symptom. He's not the cause, he's a symptom. Many of you have friends and neighbors, some of you, your parents, neighbors, family members voted for Donald Trump. And they voted for Donald Trump because he diagnosed the problems, but his solutions were the opposite of what we need. His solutions were, we're gonna freeze time, we're gonna build a wall, we're gonna turn the clock backwards. We have to do the opposite of all of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society as quickly as possible. We have to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our role in society. And I am the perfect candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Thank you all. Looking forward to getting your questions.
We're going to start off with the same question that every other candidate has had today.
What did they say?
We'll see in a little bit. When registering to attend this event, almost 57% of students reported that they'd be eligible to vote in the 2020 election, yet only 44% said that they plan to. If you win the Democratic nomination, what will you do to engage America's youth and increase youth voter participation?
I get it. I'm running for president in part because I believe we have left the next generation, you all, a total disaster. And one of the rational responses to the fact that we're leaving you a disaster is to say, there's nothing I can do about it, I'm going to check out. Because the fact is, if you engage in our politics, it can be really depressing. It feels like people aren't talking to you, and you despair that your time and energy is not going to actually bear any improvement on your life, your way of life. And it's not just that chunk of young people that are deciding to disengage. 25% of Americans say they are politically disengaged because they don't believe that we can actually solve these problems. I understand completely. The reason why I'm here in Iowa, along with the other parade of candidates, is because this is one of the only places where what I just said is patently false. Like, you all can actually make a big, big difference. If I was in any other state in the country, I'd be lying to you if I said that your vote could make a big difference, but here, it can. You only need about 40,000 Iowans to change the future of this country. How many Iowans are there here in this room today, right now? Like maybe 300? Like something along those lines? I did the math. Do you know how many Californians each Iowan is worth? 1,000. So there are 300,000 Californians in this room. That's like 7 football stadiums. That is the magic of this state. This is the only place where democracy actually works. And so if you are in this room, you should really caucus. Because if you caucus, it's like 1,000 other Americans caucusing. You can change the future of this country very quickly, and we need to do it for your sake. We have left you a total mess, and we have to clean it up. But we cannot clean it up without your help.
Your next question is going to come from the audience. His name is Dustin Hagler. He's a student at Hoover High School.
Good morning. 8 deaths have been linked to vaping, and lawmakers are already proposing bans on e-cigarettes. How many kids need to die before there is serious binding action on gun violence, and what will you do specifically to save kids' lives?
So this is a question about gun violence, not vaping. To be clear. I am for the gun safety laws that the vast majority of Americans are for, which is no military-style assault weapons, background checks, red flag laws, magazines. But I think you have to go much, much deeper. Because if you look at it, there's a whole chain of events that leads to gun violence. And the last 2 steps are getting the firearm and then using the firearm, which are things that we have to try and address. But then what is the cascade that led there? And so number one, you have to start in the homes, where why are so many of our families now stressed out? If you've heard anything about my campaign, you've heard that I want to give every American $1,000 a month. How many of you have heard that? Yeah, it's true. I want to give every one of you $1,000 a month. And the goal of that is to make our way of life stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, where if you have an adverse life circumstance, like you lose your job, instead of it being like an existential problem, it becomes something that you can deal with. So we have to try and make our families stronger. We have to try and make our schools more welcoming for different types of boys in particular, because we all know that where gun violence is concerned, 96% plus are boys. And our schools right now, if you come into a school and you're, like neurologically different, like one of my sons is autistic, and has ADHD. And so if you come into school and the school is not well designed for that sort of learning profile, then you can easily feel marginalized and bullied. And at the very, very extreme, you could wind up doing yourself harm or doing someone else harm. So we need to focus on the gun laws and try and reduce the supply. I would be for a voluntary buyback of guns. I would be for trying to upgrade the guns themselves so that they actually can only be fired by the owner. So if a kid gets his hands on them, then they won't fire. There's very heavy paperweights. But I want to go deeper. I want to go towards mental health, what's happening to families, what's happening in our schools, and try and help boys in particular go from being strong boys to strong men. And that's the progression that we need to help people make.
So a few months ago, you were at another forum where you were asked a question about accidental shootings and you became emotional. Senator Sanders was here just now, and we asked him about whether or not he would vote in the future to hold gun manufacturers liable for accidental shootings. Is that something that you would support?
Oh yeah, I totally would. Because right now the rough truth is that when there's a mass shooting, gun manufacturers' stocks will actually go up because their sales go up. Because gun owners are concerned that regulation is going to come, so they all run out and buy guns. So you're not going to believe this, but mass shootings are actually good for business for gun manufacturers. And so their incentives to try and curb those shootings are very, very low. So the goal is to try and, how many of you, I know some high schools now have economics. How many of you have studied economics, or some of you are college kids and the rest of it? Do you know what an externality is? So an externality is a cost that is happening, but it's happening outside of the company itself. And so that's what these gun deaths are to the gun companies. Like, I sell you the gun, and then if you shoot someone with it, then no skin off my back. So if you say to the gun manufacturers, hey, if your product gets used to kill an American, we're gonna fine you, then all of a sudden that's called internalizing the externality. And then their incentives actually become much more aligned and appropriate. So I would be all for fining gun manufacturers if they are helping make us unsafe and leading to the shooting deaths of Americans in a way that we could prevent.
Your next question is going to come from Catherine Owens. She's a student here at Roosevelt High School.
I'm going to stand if that's all right.
Go ahead.
Hello. How do you plan to deal with increasing issues in youth mental health in the U.S.?
We have a mental health crisis in this country. I'm very passionate about trying to help address it. My brother is a psychologist, to give you a sense. And I know out of 100 Americans that need treatment, probably only 5 to 10% of them are actually getting treatment right now. And there's a stigma attached to it that even though you think it's like, oh, you know, I shouldn't feel that stigma, but most people, when they're actually in that situation to seek help, a lot of people will resist doing so. So we have to make it so that you all feel comfortable seeking help. We have to get the resources in place. And there's a technology element to this where studies have shown that smartphones are actually increasing anxiety and depression among young people, teenage girls in particular. And my friends in Silicon Valley tell me that you have engineers that are trying to turn supercomputers or smartphones into dopamine delivery devices for teenage girls. And they're making millions of dollars doing it. But you know what they do when they go home? They say, no screens in my house and my family. So that gives you some insight into what's happening in our business world that's actually impacting mental health. Because then you see the trends among teenagers for anxiety and depression are at historic highs. And so if you want to try and address it, you have to get the resources in place. And I would actually make our mental health part of our economic measurements. Like, what good is GDP if we're getting sicker or sadder? But then you have to try and get into the root causes, which in this case can involve the fact that our capitalist system has run amok, and that includes the fact that tech companies have a very strong incentive to hypnotize us and a very low or non-existent incentive to make us stronger and healthier and mentally healthier.
So you were talking about resources, but where would those resources be? Would it be in schools, in the workplace, somewhere else?
Well, there are so many people that want to become therapists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists. There's no shortage of people that want to go into those fields. But we're artificially constraining the supply of those people through the way we're educating and training them. Mm-hmm. It's very expensive in many cases to try and seek that training, and you have to be some genius at tests to get into some of these programs. So what I would do is I would try and expand the supply over time of psychologists, counselors, therapists, social workers, and people that make us stronger. And I would reduce the cost of, I have many friends who are social workers, and I'll tell you, like, it's expensive to become a social worker, and then when you become a social worker, you don't get paid that much. Right now, our entire economy is geared towards turning us all into economic actors. So if you were to go to, like I went to law school, if you go to law school and you can merge and get paid a lot of money, and trust me, I was a corporate lawyer for 5 months, and I was doing a lot less good than the average social worker, that's for sure. Like, you probably should have reversed those, those incentives. So that's the direction we have to move in. We have to actually try measuring our economic progress through our own health and wellness, and then invest massive levels of resources towards helping people who can help others get stronger.
So you see it as more of like a long-term solution, you'd say?
There are a lot of short-term things you can do. I mean, one thing we should do very, very quickly is lighten the emphasis on standardized tests in our schools and also in getting a lot of these programs. And I'll tell you all a true story. The SAT was invented during World War II to try and figure out which kids they did not want to send to the front lines. And now we're using it every year like every year is wartime. It does not make any sense. And it's artificially constraining the supply of people who want to do good in our society. It's bludgeoning so many kids to feel like, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to do certain things because what, the stupid test tells me I'm not supposed to? It really does not make any sense.
I'd like to bring in Sam Crone. He's a student at Iowa State University in Ames.
Good morning, Mr. Yang, and thank you for being here today. I am a student pursuing a career in environmental science. If climate change continues at its current rate, there might not be much of an environment left for me to work on. How will you protect our environment to ensure that I have a reliable job when I graduate college?
For better or for worse, you're definitely going to have a job. I can guarantee you that. because there's so much work to be done in this direction. The last 4 years have been the 4 warmest years in recorded history, and July was the warmest month ever. So climate change at this point is accelerating, and we have to try and get in front of it. We have to also be realistic. So I proposed a 5-part plan to try and move us in the right direction. Number 1 is move us towards renewable sources of energy, wind and solar. So you have a carbon fee and dividend, but then you have to go to the rest of the world. The rest of the world's 85% of emissions. And right now, in Africa, they're burning coal. They're burning coal because it's cheap and it's dirty. So if we want them to move off of coal, then we have to go to those societies and say, we have a better form of energy for you and it's cheaper. We're gonna have to subsidize it. We're gonna have to invest in it. They're just gonna do whatever the lowest cost option is. The third thing I would do is invest billions of dollars in making our communities more resilient before the fact. You all saw the floods last summer here in the Midwest, so this is not a coastal phenomenon alone. And it's much more expensive to rebuild after the fact than to try and make our communities safer and more resilient from the get-go. You can actually save a lot of money if you invest ahead of time. That's not the way America operates today. America just reacts. Like, after you destroy my town, then I guess we'll rebuild. We have to make the town safer in the beginning. We have to try and move our people to higher ground, both literally and figuratively. So this would be, and for anyone, this is very dramatic, but we actually already moved people in Louisiana whose town was going underwater to another part of the country. So this is already going on. If you had $1,000 a month, it would also help make everyone safer from climate change, because then if there is a disaster, you have a car to get into, you have some place to go. And I would have a constitutional amendment saying that it's a responsible. There's a proverb that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now. That's what it is with climate change. We should have done it 20 years ago, but as president, I'm going to do it right now.
Your next question is going to come from Taylor Kahn Perry. She's affiliated with Student Voice, a national nonprofit focused on empowering youth. She's a student at Georgetown, where you were last week, and she flew all the way here to ask you this question.
Really?
Yes, it's good
Did
to
you
see
see me
you
last week
again
too in Georgetown?
in the gym. I heard about it. I heard you were
That's
at our
fine.
student gym. Yes. So my question is, will your administration commit to providing funds for deeper learning initiatives like social and emotional learning and arts education?
Oh my gosh, yes. You came all the way to ask me that question? I am so on board. We need to get much, much deeper about the way we educate and learn. And I feel like I'm going to take digs at like our current educators, who I love. I love teachers, I love educators. I met the superintendent of the schools, he seemed phenomenal. But we need to try and make school more relevant for our young people. Because right now there's this sneaking suspicion that a lot of the stuff we're teaching you, you could just look up on your smartphone. And so then the part of you is like, hey, is this what I need to be learning? And we're preparing you for an economy that is evolving very, very quickly. So we need to go much deeper. We need to have psychosocial and emotional learning. We need to teach resilience, positive psychology. Meditation works very, very well for a lot of people. These are things that we need to try and bring to our educational institutions to humanize them. Because right now we're preparing you for an industrial economy that is evolving very, very quickly. Is there anything else I can add on that? Because I love that so much. I'm very into it. Oh, thank you. You know, I also want to say I would want you all to learn financial literacy as well. But one of the things I've learned over time is it is impossible to learn financial literacy if you do not have money. What I mean by that is, like, it's abstract. You teach me about compound interest and time value of money. I do not care until you give me money. And then after I have money, then all of a sudden I start listening. I start caring. So it happened to me. I have an economics degree. I still didn't understand it until I started working and made some money in my 20s. I went to college for it, and it still didn't sink in until you actually have it in your own life. So under my administration, everyone starts receiving $1,000 a month, and then we teach you financial literacy in high school, and you would actually learn it because you have money, like real money to invest. It would also be a $12,000 a year raise immediately for teachers who deserve that and more. And for anyone who thinks that like this is too good to be true, we can do it because I'm standing in Iowa. All it takes is 40,000 Iowans, and then this vision of a trickle-up economy takes fire, and we can totally change the way we operate in this country.
Your next question is going to come from Hunter Anderson, clearly a Yang fan. He's a student here at Roosevelt High School. Hunter?
That's so fun, Hunter.
What is your plan for the future of American space travel, and how does that fit with your principles regarding the use of fossil fuels, which is heavily relied upon in the space industry?
So I'm not sure how many of you saw that I was endorsed by Elon Musk last month. You guys see that? So I have visited SpaceX and seen the future of space travel. And right now, we're at a time in American history where private industry is doing a lot of things that used to be done by government. So we have all seen the Apollo 13 movies and like all of that stuff where it's like a bunch of noble government engineers and physicists like designing all the stuff. That has all now moved over to SpaceX and Blue Origin and these other firms. And so I'm very, very optimistic about the future of space travel because I've met people who are working on it directly, and they are so passionate. They're working on it for the good of the species. They have hundreds of brilliant people working alongside them. And just because they don't work for the government doesn't mean that they're not working incredibly feverishly hard. And the way they're designing these rockets does not necessarily mean that we're going to be using tons and tons of fossil fuel to get people into space. I mean, right now that is what we're using. But there are other things that we can use that would provide the same levels of energy that we need. And it's one of the things that I know Elon and the other people that I'm on a first name basis. Elon, I can text him right now. Yeah, seriously. I know that Elon feels very, very strongly that, and it's one reason why, his other projects, obviously Tesla, which is trying to move us towards electric cars to lighten our dependence on fossil fuels. So they're very much linked together. But we can do it, for sure. That's a SpaceX story I can tell.
I'm sorry?
I'm trying to think of a fun SpaceX story I can tell. I don't
We have
know.
time at the end.
It's like something's confidential.
Your next question will come from Runal Patel, a student at Drake University here in Des Moines.
Mr. Yang, next summer we will celebrate the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was sponsored by Iowa's very own former Senator Tom Harkin. If elected president, what will you do to help students with disabilities gain equitable access in both school and the workplace?
Thank you for the question. To me, it's imperative that we provide for people who are differently abled. And again, I have a son who's on the autism spectrum who in some classifications would be considered disabled. And the law in the books is not enough. I mean, a lot of what happens with politicians, and this is one reason why a lot of you have checked out on politics, is that you have this instinct that you change the rule, and then that does not actually necessarily change the lived reality of the people it's meant to. So the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, is an example. Rules on the books, but then you go to places, and there are all these places that are not accessible, that theoretically should be accessible. And the reason for that is that those establishments or institutions don't want to spend the money to make themselves more accessible. And that if you have a situation where you have scarce resources, you say, you know what, I'm just gonna let that one ride, and then if someone brings an action against me, I'll like pay the fine or figure it out then, or do it. Like that's just the system we're in. So a lot of what we have to do is try and remove that choice from these institutions and say, look, here are the resources, and then complying with the ADA gets much, much easier. The biggest lie in American life right now is that we don't have the resources. We are the richest economy in the history of the world, $20 trillion and counting, up $5 trillion in the last 12 years. The problem is that we've put this mindset of scarcity on many of our people in our institutions where they look around and say, I don't have the resources to provide for differently abled Americans. And after we reverse that and say, look, there are plenty of resources to go around, then we'll be able to make real change on the ground and enforce some of the laws that we already have on the books.
Your next question will come from Mr. Richard Bell.
You're
He's
not a
teacher.
student. I mean,
I'm not.
He's a teacher at the Maharishi School in Fairfield. Drove 2 hours to be here. Mr. Bell?
Good morning. Wow. I do teach at a school that hosts students from more than 30 countries. So I've seen firsthand the value of immigration and diversity in a school. My question for you is, how would you manage the flow of immigrants at our southern border?
I'm the son of immigrants myself, and I obviously have the same experience you do, where I think immigrants are very, very positive for our country. The southern border, to me, this is another emblem of where we have rules on the books that we're not actually able to enforce in a real way. So we have asylum application procedures, but in real life, there's a shortage of asylum judges and adjudicators, there's a shortage of facilities, there's a shortage of case managers. And so then when you come across the border and you want to have an asylum hearing, you have a 12, 15-month wait. And so we're not actually able to enforce the law as it's written. The first thing you do is you put an end to this inhumane detention and separation of families, and that's something we can do immediately. As a parent, that stuff's unconscionable, but we all kind of sense why it's happening, is that you have this inhuman bureaucracy where no one has real responsibility down at the border, and you have these policies in place, and then people become capable of things they would never be capable of in civilian life. Like if you took someone who's working at the southern border right now and said, hey, separate this toddler from their parent, they would never do it. But then in this circumstance, they say, well, I guess it's my job, and I guess this is the policy, and I guess I'm in this facility, and then you do it. So what we have to do is we have to put the resources to work to actually live up to what our policies are. Say, look, if we have a shortage of judges, then we need to hire many more. We need to put the resources to work so that there are case managers, social workers, and facilities, and then put ourselves in positions that we can actually reflect our values at the southern border. It's a big investment, but if you're not going to build a wall, am I right? You're going to build facilities so that you can actually process people the way our laws are written. Thank you.
Now for your final question today, let's get a bit
This
more.
can't be it.
Well, let's get a bit more personal. In either your professional or personal life, who has been your hero and why?
This is going to sound kind of trite, but it really is my parents, because they immigrated to this country with nothing, just worked very, very hard. My father grew up on a peanut farm in Asia with no floor. He managed to get from there to this country, where he generated over 69 US patents for GE and IBM. So that, to me, was always this incredible arc. And he worked at IBM. I asked him when I was a teenager, I said, how much money do you get when you get a patent? And he said to me, $200. And I said, well, that doesn't seem like a lot. And then he said, well, I also get a salary to educate and clothe and feed you and your brother. And I said, oh, I get it then, I understand. And to me, there was something very noble about what he and my mom did, because they just came and just worked their butts off all the time. And then me and my brother looked up and were just like, and you know, frankly, I was like a fairly normal kid, so I'd just be there playing video games and like doing whatever I was doing, and then occasionally they'd be like, you know, why are you so lazy? Why don't you like do something? And of course, as a teenager, I was like, shut up. You know, let me get back to my level. But then you end up internalizing it and living up to it in ways that you might not have anticipated when you were young and didn't truly understand. So it's a little bit trite, but I would say my parents.
Now feel free to take a minute to offer closing remarks.
Thank you, Roosevelt High School. Thank you, Iowa. You all are incredible. What does MATH stand for? Make America think harder. That's right. We have to let our fellow Americans know that it is not immigrants that are causing these problems. It is technology and an evolving economy. This is the story we have to tell, because right now our fellow citizens are confused. They don't really understand what's happening. You have Donald Trump telling a certain story, and it worked here in Iowa. It worked on many, many of our fellow citizens, tens of millions of them. We need a different story. And this story is the most powerful because it happens to be the truth. That we're in the midst of the biggest economic transformation in our country's history. It is pushing more and more Americans to the side, and it's making it impossible for us to solve the problems of our young people. We have a political system that does not work for you all at all. It doesn't. That's why some of you are checked out. One of the things I'm championing is I want to lower the voting age to 16. And I'm going to walk you through why it makes total sense to lower the voting age to 16. Number one, the younger you are when you vote, the more likely you are to vote throughout your life. So then, if you get people voting young, then guess what? They'll vote forever. Number two, right now the electorate tends to skew older, and that ends up influencing policies that would not reflect the needs of this generation. Number three, you're going to be on this planet longer. I mean, if anyone has a stake, it should be you all, right? Not like, no offense to anyone, but like if there's like some 96-year-old at death's door, it's like, come on, you're not going to be here for very long. It's like, whereas you guys are going to be here for a long time. And then the only argument against lowering the voting age, you also, 16-year-olds, how many of you work as 16-year-olds? That means you pay taxes. And you pay taxes and you don't vote? That doesn't seem right. The only counter argument to having 16-year-olds vote is that you somehow don't know that much about politics. To which I'd suggest there are a lot of Americans who don't know that much about politics. They're called low information voters. That's actually the technical term for it. And it's not like we're giving people a age group. We should be applying the same standard to our young people. So that's what this campaign is about. It's about trying to make it work for you all. But we cannot do it without your help. And here in Iowa, you all are magic. Like everything you do is like 1,000 times more powerful than anywhere else in the country. So use that power wisely, and let's make history in 2020. Thank you very much, Roosevelt High School. Thank you.
Let's get this bread, freedom dividend. Are all y'all paying attention? Automation gonna sweep the nation unless we get him in. Andrew Yang, 2020 freedom dividend. Climate change is real again. Science rules. Teachers bringing home some bread. Medicare for every citizen. Andrew Yang, 2020 freedom dividend.